granniopteryx, granniopteryx. She knows the truth, she's linking every link.
Hello, we are virtually in the House of Commons debating chamber now, and this chap here is David Davis. I have to admit, something of a hero of mine. He's a very good MP and an honourable man, which, you know, they seem rather thin on the ground recently. OK, he's talking about the Lucy Letby case. And he details in about 30-minute speech, he details all the problems surrounding that case. So what I've done is I've just extracted a few of the salient points for you. If you want to, all you've got to do is go and find the whole video of the entire speech online. Now, some of you may be a little concerned about the fact that there's hardly anybody there in the debating chamber. I don't know when he made this speech, but it could have been, for instance, on Friday afternoon when most of the other MPs had gone home or back to their constituencies, because they're supposed to go back and deal with constituency matters as well. But that's not the important point, you see, because he makes the speech and then that gets recorded in Hansard, which is the minutes of the speeches, and then other MPs read the minutes, and it's down on record, and that's the important part of this. So the fact that there's hardly anyone there is scarcely important. Nobody's going to be debating this. Davis started his speech by talking about the notorious Sally Clark case, in which a woman was accused of murdering her 2 children who had died of sudden infant cot death syndrome, or whatever it's called, and she was convicted on a set of bogus statistics quoted in the court for the prosecution by a man who turned out to be just murderously incompetent or murderously malignant. I don't know which. Anyway, he had to resign in disgrace after his chicanery was exposed. Then, after having quoted the Sally Clark case, Mr. Davis then tells us that the Letby case has been examined by 2 experienced retired police officers. I'm assuming they are people he has sent the case to. One was an assistant chief constable, the other a detective superintendent. So they are experienced men. And they both started off believing that Letby was guilty, but after looking at the way the case was pursued and the evidence, now both are absolutely convinced she's innocent. So let's listen to David Davis.
So let us forensically analyse the prosecution of this case, using as a reference proper police procedure, prosecutorial standards, medical murder investigation guidelines, CPS guidance, the evidence from the Thirlwell inquiry, and the considered critiques from these 2 experienced police officers. The neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital was failing. Its medical management was at best inadequate, at worst appalling. Indeed, the unit was downgraded a week after Letby was suspended and prevented from taking any more very seriously ill babies. Before the police investigation, numerous reviews looked at the Countess of Chester and found no evidence of criminal activity. The most salient of these was by the Royal College of Paediatricians and Child Health, who found no criminal events, but did identify numerous shortcomings in medical care at the hospital. Numerous shortcomings. Cheshire Police ignored this. The jury was never informed of it. Dr. Watts notes, our Assistant Chief Constable notes, the Royal College report, and I quote, raised significant concerns about systemic failings. Its exclusion from court meant alternative explanations were suppressed. Let's also remember, this was a neonatal unit with no neonatal specialist consultants, only general paediatricians. Furthermore, the Trust had dismissed all the experienced advanced neonatal nurse practitioners to save money. There was a 20% staffing shortfall. Doctors did ward rounds twice a week.
They didn't even have specialist nurses on the site to save money. The consultants, the specialist doctors, were coming round twice a week rather than twice a day, which is what they were supposed to be. I mean, twice a week, it hardly counts, especially when you consider how quickly a baby can deteriorate or become very ill.
Fragility of these children, and yet they only got seen twice a week. There were outbreaks of multiple antibiotic-resistant infections, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, MRSA, and C. difficile. Those bacteria were all detected in the hospital. Sewage was dripping from the ceilings.
I don't know about the rest of the hospital, but certainly the setup in the neonatal ward was extremely poor. And I'd say that should have been the first port of call for any inquiry about a higher than usual rate of baby deaths.
It's also notable that there were 12 stillbirths in the hospital at the same time as the spike in neonatal deaths. Stillbirths that Lucy Letby was nowhere near. This was also ignored by Cheshire Police. So why did Cheshire Police decide Letby was responsible? Initially, there was no intention to launch any criminal investigation. But on the 15th of May 2017, that all changed. After a single meeting with two consultants from the County of Chester, Dr. Stephen Breary and Dr. Ravi Jayaram, Letby was explicitly identified as the focus of suspicion. Now, Dr. Watts states, in this meeting, the language of this very experienced, very senior detective from the Cheshire Police Force moved from a measured, rational, professional tone to inappropriately emotional. He cites the senior Cheshire Police detective as saying, and I quote, "I can't describe how powerful it was. I just felt for those professionals there. I think we all owe them." Dr. Watts observes that within 24 hours of that meeting, Operation Hummingbird was up and running. That's the name of the Letby operation, Hummingbird. Within 3 days, news of the investigation into a potential murder at the Council of Chester was in the national press. This investigation was initiated by a single meeting with consultants who had themselves been involved in seriously inadequate care of these babies.
The police then went to various medical practitioners involved in that part of the hospital, asking them about, well, basically it looks like asking them whom to blame. And all of these people that they were consulting were themselves demonstrably at fault in many cases. Of course, everyone makes mistakes, but of course, when people make mistakes, they often feel guilty and then want to try and offload their guilt onto some other person or condition.
At Letby were Dr. Stephen Breary, Dr. John Gibbs, Dr. Ravi Jayaram, and one anonymised doctor, for the court's own reasons, anonymised doctor, who had all demonstrated poor care. One had wrongly punctured a baby's liver. That baby later died. One was found by a coroner to be responsible for the death of a child after a breathing tube was inserted into the esophagus rather than the trachea, the gullet rather than the windpipe. One pushed an endotracheal tube into one baby's lungs, leaving the other collapsed. That baby later died. One clearly misled the jury, claiming he had virtually caught, that was the words, virtually caught, Letby doing nothing as a baby collapsed in front of her. Evidence that his own emails disproved.
David Davis is saying that a doctor lied to the court to implicate Letby in the death of a child, or, the lack of care of one of the babies, because his emails suggested that Letby had acted properly, but in court he said she hadn't. Now, this may not have been an actual lie. It may have been that because of pressure from everybody around him saying that Letby was guilty, he had developed a false memory. That's entirely possible. But anyway, his own emails were at variance with what he said later on in court, and that's important.
Could very well have contributed to the spikes in deaths attributed to Letby. Dr. Watts again poses an important question, I quote, "Where was the decision not to treat the doctors as suspects, or other nurses, or cleaners? Justice demands that the police look at everyone. It does not permit them to fixate on one individual and build a case solely around them."
That is a common psychological problem. The police would probably have been more impressed by the specialists than they were by one of the nurses. And so the tendency to fall upon the nurses and then hone in on one of them would have been already pre-programmed. I am suggesting, I suppose, that there wasn't actual malice. There was just a snowball effect of prejudice and snobbery. I don't know how else you describe it when you get a policeman thinking that a specialist knows more than a nurse. But as we've seen from many of the comments under my videos about the NHS and the Letby case, sometimes nurses know more than the specialists because they're at the coal face.
Now, crucial to the case against Letby was the infamous shift table, presented as evidence that she was on duty for all the incidents when babies collapsed or died.
What the police did was they showed when babies died and they showed when Letby was there, but not when she wasn't there and because other babies died and they died when Letby wasn't there. They didn't show that.
Cheshire Police, who compiled the table, chose to highlight only the shifts during which Letby was present, disregarding similar events when she was not. The 7 deaths charged as murders were in effect selected because she happened to be on duty. As Stuart Clifton bluntly puts it, Evans cherry-picked the cases to match Letby's shifts, and police used this in their chart to reflect her presence.
Dewey Evans was the main prosecution witness, and he has been under some suspicion for partiality. I suppose that's the only way I can put it.
At those events highlighted by Evans, one has to wonder just how he settled on those children where Letby was present. Any qualified statistician could have pointed this out to Cheshire Police. In fact, one did. In April 2018, a police officer approached one of the country's leading statisticians, Professor Jane Hutton, asking her to put a figure on the likelihood of a nurse being on duty during all the deaths and collapses in the unit. It's almost a rerun of the Sally Clark argument. Cheshire Police had signed a consultancy agreement with Professor Hutton. Professor Hutton warned them that their whole approach was wrong. The police then told her the prosecutor has instructed us not to pursue this avenue any further.
I'm stopping there to let that sink in. So Jane Hutton said that their statistical approach was wrong, and they said that the chief prosecutor had told them not to take any notice of statistical problems that she had pointed out. All right.
And the prosecutor tells them to sack her. But neither the defence nor the jury was told of Professor Hutton's explicit warnings to the police. Unsurprising, really, because this obliterated the prosecutor's statistical argument, the foundation of their entire case. Professor Hutton believes the statistical errors are similar to those in the Sally Clark case, but worse. I wrote to the Chief Constable about how those bogus statistics are being compiled. He refused to answer any of my questions that I had raised and said he would, quote, not be providing any further detail or engaging in ongoing correspondence, close quote. So much for transparency and welcoming challenge.
So he was interrupted by another member who raised the point that there'd been retrials, reviews, appeals, and Davis's answer was that this only highlighted the problems with the appeal process. And then he suggested ways to deal with complicated cases such as this. For instance, having everything reviewed by detectives completely unknown to the team who are doing the investigation and not linked to that team in any way. All right, then he talked about the way Letby herself was treated.
You see, they arrested Lucy Letby 3 times, claiming it was necessary for questioning, despite her freely volunteering to come in for questioning. And Dr. Watt said, remember, an assistant chief constable said, this is completely wrong. It's also extraordinary that this unthreatening young girl was marched in handcuffs, mirroring the way American authorities try to influence public opinion against subjects when they are perp-walked to court. Dr. Watt says again, the intelligence about Lucy Letby was that she was non-violent. There was absolutely no justification for her to be handcuffed on those occasions.
I suspect that at that point there was some doubts even among the police. And so, as is often the case when you're backed into a sort of mental corner, you start doubling down. So they handcuffed her and marched her in front of cameras and all the rest of it, which helped them confirm to themselves that they were doing the right thing. I'm pretty sure that was at least part of the reason this happened.
Letby was also accused in court of lying about being arrested in her pyjamas. But the recent Netflix documentary proves that she was telling the truth. It's astonishing that the police who were in the court, who knew how she was dressed when she was arrested, did not intervene with prosecutors to tell them that they had got it wrong, but left the jury to believe that Lucy was lying about something when she was plainly telling the truth. Frankly, it's astounding the lengths that Cheshire Police were willing to go to manage their own public relations, sometimes I think at the cost of achieving justice. So here we have it. Despite warning signs of the Sally Clark case, we see that Cheshire Police have either ignored or broken the rules, disregarding relevant safeguards time and time again. They failed to pursue alternative lines of inquiry. They failed to refer the case to the appropriate specialist authorities. They failed to conduct proper due diligence on the appointment of key witnesses, expert witnesses. They failed to engage with real experts about complex statistical evidence and failed to correctly inform the jury of that fact. They failed on several occasions to disclose critical material to the defence. On the evidence before us, there have been clear and serious departures from statutory guidance and multiple deviations from best professional practice. Because of the way this was handled,
I want to point out here that there are guidelines, and as far as Mr. Davis is saying, those guidelines weren't followed in many cases, which only goes to show that you can have as many guidelines as you want, but if the police are determined to do something, then they will do it for a series of different reasons, not necessarily malice. Embarrassment. Embarrassment is a very powerful feeling and can lead to all sorts of nastinesses simply by people trying to hide the fact that they're embarrassed about their own behaviour.
the police should, and I would recommend them, to provide Letby's defence team with a whole series of documentation. I'll publish a full list online because of time, but it would include the senior investigating officer's policy books and decision books, records of identified lines of inquiry, logs kept by functional managers, minutes of all the meetings held from the team meetings right up to the goal coordination meetings. That would at least start to demonstrate what went wrong here. Irrespective of how Cheshire Police respond, I should tell the Minister I shall be writing to the Director of Public Prosecutions about these issues and asking him to review the behaviour both of the CPS and the police.
I haven't looked at all the files, but David Davis has, and he has researchers as well. And he's probably got a very comprehensive knowledge of that case, and he is absolutely convinced that this has been a really terrible miscarriage of justice. All right, Well, that's David Davis and me on the latest in the Lucy Letby saga. Till next time. You can help my channel by subscribing and clicking the notification bell. That's quite important. And by sharing if you're so inclined. Links to my other channels and to donation methods are in the description. But the best way you can help is simply by clicking like and notify. Thank you.